The BRICS alliance, composed of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has steadily grown in geopolitical influence, with the potential to alter the existing balance of power. Initially formed as a bloc focused on economic cooperation, BRICS has evolved to represent a group of countries that share an interest in reducing dependence on Western-led financial systems. This coalition is particularly significant because its members collectively represent over 40% of the world's population and contribute to approximately a third of global GDP. While each BRICS nation brings a unique economic and political perspective, they are united by a common desire to create a multipolar world, where power is more evenly distributed among nations, rather than concentrated primarily in the West. The origins of BRICS date back to 2009, when the founding members gathered to discuss mutual economic goals, such as developing infrastructure and strengthening trade relationships. At its core, BRICS was initially about harnessing the collective economic strength of these fast-growing economies. However, as geopolitical tensions between the West and other global powers intensified, BRICS took on a new significance. By 2014, BRICS members established the New Development Bank, which was designed to finance development projects and reduce reliance on Western financial institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. For developing countries, BRICS offers an alternative source of funding which comes with fewer policy stipulations than traditional Western loans. A significant dimension of BRICS's strategy lies in its efforts to reduce dependency on the US dollar. Currently, the dollar is the world's dominant reserve currency, which means it is widely used for international trade and held by central banks globally. For BRICS, reliance on the dollar presents both a risk and a limitation. With sanctions becoming an increasingly common tool in international diplomacy, countries like Russia have experienced firsthand how dollar dominance can impact their economies. As a result, BRICS has begun exploring mechanisms that allow member countries to trade using local currencies. While establishing an official BRICS currency remains a theoretical discussion, the idea of a shared currency represents a significant potential shift in global trade dynamics, which would allow BRICS nations to bypass the dollar in financial transactions. If BRICS were to successfully establish an alternative currency or an efficient system for local currency trade, it could start to reshape the global financial landscape. For instance, if oil transactions or other major commodities were priced in a BRICS currency rather than the dollar, this would weaken the dollar's dominance and reduce Western leverage over international trade. In addition to practical benefits, a BRICS currency or even a strong local currency arrangement would signal a symbolic break from Western financial influence. Such a shift could encourage other emerging economies to follow suit, further diminishing the role of the dollar and increasing the economic independence of nations outside the Western sphere. In recent years, the potential expansion of BRICS has been another point of discussion, with countries such as Argentina, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia expressing interest in joining the bloc. Expansion would mark a significant step toward a more powerful BRICS, not only adding economic diversity but also enhancing its geopolitical leverage. For instance, the inclusion of Saudi Arabia, a key global oil exporter, would elevate BRICS's ability to influence global energy markets. If Saudi oil exports were priced in a currency other than the dollar, this would represent a historic shift, with far-reaching implications for global trade and currency reserves. Other prospective members could bring strategic resources, regional influence, and military capabilities, adding layers of strength to the BRICS coalition. The expansion is seen by supporters as a way to strengthen the group's bargaining power, while critics argue that adding countries with differing political systems and economic priorities could complicate decision-making within BRICS. One of the fundamental challenges BRICS faces in trying to redefine the geopolitical order lies in the diversity of its members. China and India, for instance, have vastly different political systems, with China's single-party structure contrasting sharply with India's democratic framework. Furthermore, India and China have a long-standing border dispute, which has led to periodic tensions. However, these two have shown willingness to resolve these disputes as demonstrated in the latest BRICS summit in Kazan, Russia. However, such differences may make it challenging for BRICS to present a fully unified front, as strategic and political priorities vary significantly among the members. For example, Russia's geopolitical strategies are often at odds with those of Brazil, which tends to adopt a less confrontational stance toward Western nations. These differences present an obstacle to deep integration. as BRICS members must navigate complex domestic and international interests. From a Western perspective, the rise of BRICS represents both a challenge and a potential shift in the post-Cold War order. The West, particularly the United States, has historically shaped international norms through institutions like the United Nations, the IMF, and the World Bank. These organizations, despite their global mission statements, are often perceived as vehicles for Western economic and political influence. The BRICS nations, through their development of alternative institutions, offer a competing model that appeals to countries seeking to avoid the constraints often attached to Western aid and loans. By providing funding with fewer conditions, BRICS has positioned itself as a viable alternative for nations that wish to pursue development on their own terms. A significant potential impact of BRICS's growing influence on the West is the possible erosion of dollar dominance. The dollar's role as the primary reserve currency provides significant benefits to the U.S. economy, such as lower borrowing costs and high demand for U.S. assets. If BRICS nations were to successfully implement a large-scale shift away from the dollar, it could lead to a decrease in global demand for the dollar, impacting its value and possibly increasing inflationary pressures within the U.S. Moreover, the diminished role of the dollar would weaken the effectiveness of U.S. sanctions as a tool of foreign policy. Currently, the U.S. can exert pressure on nations by limiting their access to the dollar-dominated financial system. A successful BRICS alternative would reduce the potency of these sanctions, as countries could operate through alternative systems that are less vulnerable to U.S. influence. The potential for a BRICS-led shift in global power has broader implications for the balance of international relations. As BRICS grows, it creates a multipolar world where influence is shared among multiple powerful blocs, rather than concentrated in a single superpower. This change could bring stability for some regions, as countries gain alternatives to align themselves economically without relying solely on Western alliances. However, a multipolar world also brings the risk of increased competition and rivalries as the existing Western bloc and an emerging BRICS bloc vie for influence. This competition may extend into areas like technology, military alliances, and strategic investments, as each side works to strengthen its position. The BRICS alliance's evolution and potential expansion raise some intriguing questions about the long-term trajectory of global governance, as it pursues a multipolar approach distinct from the unipolar world shaped by the United States since the end of the Cold War. Some analysts argue that if BRICS continues to gain momentum, it could encourage other nations to seek alternatives to Western-led organizations, particularly those nations who feel marginalized by current international structures. This potential shift would not only impact geopolitical alliances but could also alter the way global institutions operate, from financial regulation to climate policy. One area of possible transformation is how global standards are set. Presently, Western institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO have historically dictated the terms of global economic engagement, often tying financial assistance to reforms like market liberalization and anti-corruption measures. If BRICS and similar alliances succeed in establishing their own frameworks, we may see new standards that prioritize different metrics, such as the common but differentiated responsibilities emphasized by BRICS in climate negotiations, which stress the distinct roles of developed and developing nations in reducing emissions. This divergence could lead to competing regulatory frameworks, especially in areas where BRICS members have strong economic stakes, like energy policy or technology standards. In technology, for example, the rise of BRICS could challenge Western dominance in setting global norms around data privacy, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence. China's rapid advancements in AI and its approach to data sovereignty provide an alternative to the European GDPR model and the more liberal U.S. approach. If BRICS succeeds in developing common tech policies, it could encourage other nations to adopt BRICS-aligned standards, potentially fragmenting the global technology landscape. Such a divide might create challenges for multinational corporations that would need to navigate varying regulatory regimes across different regions, potentially slowing innovation and complicating cross-border data flows. Energy policy could also be redefined in a world with a stronger BRICS presence. Many BRICS nations are major players in global energy production and consumption, from Russia's significant role as an energy exporter to China's status as the world's largest energy consumer. With environmental concerns increasingly driving global policy, BRICS could offer an alternative framework for addressing climate issues, emphasizing energy security and access over the rapid decarbonization policies often promoted by the West. This approach resonates with many developing countries who argue that their immediate economic needs should not be sacrificed for the environmental standards set by developed nations. A coordinated BRICS stance could challenge the West's influence in organizations like the International Energy Agency, creating a new paradigm for global energy governance that accommodates both growth and sustainability, but potentially at a slower pace than Western-led initiatives. As BRICS potentially expands, the bloc's influence in the global arms trade might also grow. Russia and China are major arms exporters, and both have sought to diversify their client base by selling to countries that either cannot access Western arms or prefer not to rely on them. A more formalized BRICS defense cooperation could provide a platform for weapons development and sales that bypass Western sanctions and export controls, complicating Western efforts to limit the spread of advanced military technologies. Enhanced BRICS cooperation in defense could also reduce member states' dependence on Western technology, leading to more self-sufficient military capabilities. BRICS countries have long advocated for reforms in international organizations, particularly the United Nations Security Council, where they argue that the current permanent membership, comprising 5 nuclear powers from World War II, does not accurately reflect the modern geopolitical landscape. Both India and Brazil have sought permanent seats on the Security Council, and BRICS has generally supported these ambitions as part of its vision for a more balanced world order. Should BRICS be successful in pushing for such reforms, it could lead to a more inclusive Security Council that represents a broader range of interests, potentially diluting Western influence within the body. The cumulative impact of BRICS's rise could, over time, encourage a gradual erosion of Western-centric global governance structures and create a more complex international environment. Western nations, particularly the United States, may need to reconsider their strategies to remain relevant in an increasingly multipolar world. This could involve recalibrating relationships with BRICS members, finding common ground on issues like climate change, and exploring ways to engage constructively with BRICS initiatives rather than viewing them as threats. Moreover, the potential influence of BRICS aligns with the broader trend of regionalization in global trade and diplomacy, as countries increasingly look to form alliances within their regions. This trend is also evident in initiatives like the African Continental Free Trade Area and the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership in Asia, both of which highlight a shift toward regional cooperation over global dependency. If BRICS can harness and expand this regional momentum, it could catalyze a more diversified global system where regional powers play a more central role, allowing countries to pursue independent foreign policies and economic strategies that reflect their unique conditions and aspirations. The broader question remains: will BRICS and similar movements foster greater stability by balancing power across multiple poles, or will this competition lead to further fragmentation in global governance? A world with competing power centers offers the possibility of checks and balances where no single bloc can dominate the international agenda. However, it also raises the potential for misunderstandings and rivalries, especially if communication between these blocs becomes limited. The efficacy of global institutions in such a landscape could be compromised, as rival factions pursue parallel paths rather than collaborative solutions. Ultimately, BRICS's growing influence represents a profound shift in global geopolitics that could redefine international relations. While the alliance is still in a relatively early phase of development, its trajectory suggests a world where emerging economies have more agency, and where the frameworks for trade, technology, and governance are more diverse. The future of BRICS will largely depend on the bloc's ability to maintain cohesion despite its internal differences, and to respond effectively to the challenges posed by the complex, interconnected issues of today's world. If it succeeds, BRICS could play a defining role in shaping a more balanced and multipolar world order. BRICS's potential influence on the global landscape also extends to softer elements of power, such as cultural and ideological influence. As it grows, BRICS may shape alternative narratives about development, governance, and sovereignty that challenge those promoted by Western powers. For instance, China's emphasis on non-interference and its Belt and Road Initiative have offered a model of economic engagement without the political conditions typically required by Western lenders. This approach, appealing to countries wary of Western intervention, could expand BRICS's cultural reach, potentially drawing more nations toward the BRICS philosophy of development. If BRICS continues to promote these alternative narratives, it might inspire other countries to question or move away from Western-led institutions, impacting everything from educational exchanges to media partnerships. Further, as BRICS pushes for new policies, it may also seek to address structural inequalities within the global economic system, particularly in areas like trade and technology. With China and India's massive markets and Brazil's resource wealth, BRICS nations hold significant leverage in negotiating trade terms. If the bloc succeeds in promoting fairer trade policies for emerging economies, it could reshape global trade practices, potentially creating a more equitable economic order. However, this would require a concerted effort from all members to overcome individual interests and work collectively. From a geopolitical perspective, BRICS could also influence regional stability by fostering cooperation and reducing the need for Western alliances. For instance, in South Asia, closer cooperation between India and China within BRICS might ease tensions over border disputes while creating mutual economic incentives that deter conflict. Likewise, Brazil and South Africa might find BRICS a useful platform for addressing regional issues without relying heavily on the US or Europe. Such regional stability could encourage other countries to seek BRICS membership or align with its economic policies, gradually eroding Western influence over time. At the same time, the rise of BRICS could lead to increased competition, especially in contested regions. The Indo-Pacific, for example, is already a zone of strategic rivalry between the US, China, and India. Should BRICS push for a stronger influence in this region, it may fuel further geopolitical tensions, as Western and BRICS-aligned nations compete for economic and military partnerships. This could lead to a scenario where nations in the Indo-Pacific region face pressure to choose sides, a situation reminiscent of Cold War-era alliances. Alternatively, if BRICS successfully promotes a non-aligned approach, it might offer countries in these regions a middle path, allowing them to engage economically without being pulled into great power rivalries. In conclusion, the rise of BRICS represents a pivotal shift in the balance of global power. While the alliance faces considerable challenges, it also holds the potential to redefine the international order, particularly if it succeeds in promoting alternatives to Western-dominated systems in finance, trade, and governance. Whether BRICS will achieve these ambitious goals remains uncertain, as much depends on the bloc's ability to maintain cohesion and address both internal and external pressures. However, the very presence of BRICS as a coordinated group signals the emergence of a multipolar world, where the power to shape the future is shared more widely across diverse regions and cultures. As BRICS continues to evolve, its actions will undoubtedly play a critical role in shaping the next chapter of global geopolitics, impacting everything from economic systems to regional security dynamics, and compelling the world to reconsider long-held assumptions about the nature of power and influence in the 21st century. Thank you for watching.